Good evening to all. On behalf of the management, our principal Dr. D.B. Arolkar and the Department of English of Gnan Prasarak Mandal's College and Research Center, Asagaon, Mapsa, Goa, I welcome you all for the third day webinar lecture series, Date Gate 0.1, a special welcome to our resource person, Professor Rajendra Chenni. Thank you all, my dear participants, for bearing with us with the technical cliches which we had for the past 2 days. Thank you for your patience. These obstacles would not have happened in actual classroom, but we can't sit back and relax. We have to cope up with the current scenario. Virtual classrooms will have such issues. How are we going to face it? Should be our main concern. Thank you once again to all of you for your kind cooperation. As the students of literature, we all know that there are isms in literature like romanticism, realism, and naturalism, surrealism, transcendentalism, regionalism, modernism, postmodernism, existentialism, symbolism, expressionism, Dadaism, absurdism. From the literary point of view, we have traditional literary criticism, formalism and new criticism, liberal humanism, Marxism and critical theory, structuralism and post-structuralism, psychoanalytical theory, new historicism, and cultural materialism, post-colonialism, feminism, and now the latest one, queer theory, and the list would go on. Of all isms, today we would be looking at new historicism, which is a form of literary theory and whose goal is to understand intellectual history through literature and literature through its cultural context. New historicism acknowledges not only that a work of literature is influenced by its author's time and the environment, but that the critic's response to that work, which is also influenced by his circumstances, beliefs, and prejudices. Philosophers like Stephen Greenberg, Michel Foucault, and Lacan connected history and literature. Their argument was that a literary text cannot be separated from its historical context. Then came the reader's response theory. Critics like Stanley Fish, Roland Barthes, and others paid attention to readers' role in creating meaning and experience of a literary work. Let us listen to our resource person, Professor Rajendra Chenni, whether the importance should be given to the situation in which a text is written or a text alone is sufficient to judge its value. Professor Chenni is going to speak on the topic New Historicism, Theory and Practice. I take this opportunity to introduce our resource person, Professor Rajendra Chenni. Professor Rajendra Chenni, formerly Professor of English, Kuvempu University, is presently Director, Manasa Center for Cultural Studies, Shimoga. Manasa Center is a recently established unit of Manasa Trust and is devoted to higher research in literature, social sciences, psychology, and psychiatry. Professor Chenni obtained his BA in English Literature from Karnataka College, Dharwad, winning the gold medal for English. He obtained the MA in English degree from Karnataka University, Dharwad, securing the first rank with first class and received the Armado, Menezes, and Baichwal awards for this distinction. He joined the teaching profession in 1976 and taught at Sandur, Belgavi, and PG Department of English, Karnataka University. He joined Hayadri College, Shimoga in 1980. In 1987, he received his PhD degree from University of Mysore in English literature. From 1990 to April 2018, Professor Chenni served first as reader and then as professor and chairman, postgraduate department of English, Kuvempu University. He was chairman, board of studies in English, both graduate and postgraduate, dean of arts, faculty, director, School of Languages, member of Senate, syndicate, and academic council. He served on several committees assigning the administration of the university. He guided 8 candidates in the MPhil program and 10 in the PhD program. Professor Rajendra Chenni is an eminent bilingual writer, writing in both Kannada and English. He has authored 12 books in Kannada, 4 in English, including a novel. He has participated in over 200 seminars, workshops, and conferences at the national and at the international level. His areas of specialization are literary theory, comparative literature, cultural studies, and post-colonial theories. His contribution to Kannada literature has been honored with several awards. He has received the Karnataka Sahitya Academy Book Award twice and has also received the Academy's Lifetime Achievement Award. He has also received the prestigious G.S. Shivadarappa Award and B.H. Sridhara Award, Vardhmana Udayan Mukta Award. On 27 February, he received the prestigious V.M. Inamdar Award for Literary Criticism. He has been a freelance writer, contributing articles to the Hindu, Deccan Herald, Indian Express, and Frontline. His scholarly essays had been published in Seminar, Open Magazine, Indian Literature, the latest issue of Indian Literature, published by Central Sahitya Academy, carries his essay on Girish Karnad. He has major research project on a plural history of Karnataka funded by UGC. And he is the general editor and translator for the translation project, Vachanas of Sarvanjana, being published by Central Sahitya Academy. He had attended a workshop on Holocaust at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, Israel. He has served as member of the Karnataka Sahitya Academy and chairman of the Curricular Review Committee for English Textbooks for PUC Education in Karnataka. He has the distinction of introducing basic changes in the PUC curriculum for the first time in its history. He has lectured at Delhi, Mumbai, Baroda, Thrissur, Chennai, Hyderabad, Goa, Pune, Calcutta, IIT Kharagpur, Kuppam, at many leading institutions. He has participated in many major people's movements for protecting the environment, supporting communal harmony, and for the rights of the underprivileged classes. I present before you Professor Rajendra Chenni. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shant. The major practitioner of the new criticism, F.R. Lewis, believed that the literary text is self-enclosed and self-sufficient, and it can be interpreted by the ideal reader without any reference to things outside it. For example, the social political context in which the text was produced, the influences and the intertextuality of the period, and the ideologies which had their influence on all the cultural expressions. These were not important according to F.R. Lewis because he believed that a literary text is in a way self-bound, that it is a verbal artifact, and therefore it does not need such references to history and the overall context. This became some kind of a dogma with the formalist new critics who tried to attribute a very special status to the literary text. And that, I think, is where the disagreement between the new historicists and the formalists can be traced. The formalists believed that even if a literary text carries certain traces of the social and the political context, one has to focus on how this context is realized within the aesthetic body of the text. And this does not really necessitate going outside the text and then trying to look at the other forms of expression which also existed when the text was created. This kind of dogmatic view also believed that a literary text has a very special ontological existence of its own. Apart from arguing in favor of this isolation of the literary text from other points of reference, the new criticism also brought in the argument that somehow the totality of the experience provided to us by a literary text is superior to the other discourses which probably existed when the text was created. Now, this argument somehow does not really gel with the first argument that the text enjoys a very special kind of existence, but that's how the argument was put forward. That not only is the literary text a special object, very different from the other things that we find in the field of culture, the argument was also that the experience and the knowledge given by the text was very distinctive and unique, and it was superior to the knowledge which probably one would gather from either the history of the social institutions, the social practices, the political ideologies, etc. Now, this, as one can see, reduces the literary text to merely an aesthetic object. And it also reduces the participation of the literary text in the entire field of culture. We're not talking about influences of the social context on the text, etc., because these are not the binaries which are acceptable to the new historicist practitioners. But the problem that the new historicists found in the formalist dogma was that there is no way in which, if you follow the methodology of the new criticism, to prize open the literary text and try to see how it shares with the other discourses of the time, and how it not only reflects some of these things, it also creates certain discourses. It shapes the way the people in a society understand their identities and their locations in society. This was one of the problems that the new historicists were trying to negotiate with. The problem, as I said, was if you isolate a literary text as a self-insulated um, aesthetic object, then it becomes very difficult to understand the kind of relationship which always can be found between a literary text and the other phenomena in the cultural and the historical context. So this was one. The other problem was that though the new critics were talking about the enclosed nature of the aesthetic structure of a literary text, they were also surreptitiously trying to bring in certain other criteria. For example, order, we find that critics like F.R. Lewis bring in the other criteria, for example, of the seriousness of the writer, the lived experience that goes into the text, and then the sensitivity and the inwardness that the author shows, not only with language, but also with the form that he is using. Now, it means that from the literary aesthetic, surreptitiously, the argument is moving into the moral and the ethical by introducing terms like experience and also bringing in the idea of values, etc. Uh, we also see that somehow behind this attribution of a special quality to the literary text, there is also an affiliation with what has been broadly described as the humanist tradition, a tradition which was grounded in notions of universal human nature, and then the possibility of human civilization probably developing on the path of progress, etc., etc. So when there, how do we understand the impact that a literary text makes on the readers, and more importantly, on its ambience, on its cultural and social ambience, we have a problem. And the problem is that the entire argument it gets grounded into this notion of one a universal human nature. For example, you would be arguing that a text like Othello, the play by Shakespeare, it deals with universal aspects of human nature, such as sexual jealousy, and then the temperament of a person who does not have the nuances of the social experience into which he is pushed, namely Othello. Now, if you are doing such a literary criticism, you are not able to understand that this play by Shakespeare also brings in a number of elements which are important to the text itself. For example, can we discuss Othello without reference to the idea of racial discrimination? Can we discuss that play without reference to the code of behavior and the code of morals of a white Venetian society and a soldier like Othello, who is a professional soldier and who has an entirely different cultural background, etc. This is how one can easily see the weaknesses of the formalist and the new critical approach to the literary text. The issue is that you're not trying to bring in these things from outside just because you want to interpret the text in a different way. The issue is that they are there in the text and in the production of the text. We have to look into all those things which go into the production of the text. Now, one important critic who questioned the dogma, I have described it as the new critical dogma, was Raymond Williams, who shifted the ground of the entire argument by pointing out that we have cultural practices which are embedded in the material conditions of the society of a particular period. Culture cannot be, placed once again in some kind of isolation as something which has to do only with consciousness or only with an intellectual performance or an endeavor of the intellect, etc., etc. Raymond Williams pointed out that what we describe as culture is a whole network of practices in a real society, and it is these practices which are embedded in the material conditions of the society when we need to look into it. The other important argument of Raymond Williams, which takes us very close to the new historicism, is the argument that there is no way you can hold up the literary discourse as superior to all other discourses or to all other forms of cultural expression. If you're looking at culture as essentially a network of symbolic expressions, and these are understood through discourses, then what's the way in which you're going to argue that the literary discourse is superior to the other discourses? I think these two important insights were foundational for both cultural materialism as practiced by Raymond Williams and later by a younger generation of scholars, and also to the new historicism. First of all, the point was that we have to locate a literary text in the field generally known as culture, which comprises a large number of practices, institutions and belief systems, etc. And there is a whole network of other discourses also, which may not be described as literary or aesthetic, but they are as much a part of the field of culture as the literary texts are. And more importantly, and that's the third step that one can take towards the new historicism, is that there is this very complex interplay between the literary aesthetic text which is produced and all the networks that we have been talking about. It is not that the literary text is a mirror which reflects these other discourses or the conditions of the society. That is not the new historicist position at all, arguing that there is a social context and the social context is reflected in the literary text. In fact, Stephen Greenblatt argues against the use of such binaries where you are thinking of separating the literary text and the historical context, and then arguing that the one is in the background and the one that's the literary text reflects the context. We have to move out of the binaries like literary foreground and historical background, and then trying to trace the influence of the one over the other. It's very important to understand that the new historicism not only broke away from some of the beliefs of the new criticism and tried to construct a new conception of what a text is and to what phenomena we should be using the term text or cultural text. It also looked into some of the reductionist features of the older kind of historicism. For example, if history is treated as only an inert set of so many documents and texts, um, the new historicism has no use for such a history. It's not just a collection of records and documents, etc. Because, in the first place, we cannot conceptualize history as static, as something which is like a museum piece. We are not talking about such a museumized history. We are not talking about a very static conceptualization of history. We are looking at history, as Greenblatt and others would point out, not even from diachronic point of view. The new historians are not very interested in looking at the chronology of events and how certain trends keep developing. They do pay attention, but that is not very central as a feature of history to them. Many of them would argue that we should have a synchronic view. If you're looking at, let's say, the Renaissance, because the new historicism focuses very centrally on the texts and the society, etc., of the period known as the Renaissance. We should be looking at it in a synchronic way, in the sense you look at a very dynamic field before you. You're not looking only at the origin and the development and some fixed pattern emerging from it. You're actually looking at something which is changing, something which may be contradictory, something in which there may be confusions, something in which there may be traces of the past and the present. So you this is how you are now looking at history. One of the challenges faced by the new historicism was to get away from the dominant broad narratives of history. Greenblatt and Gallagher, they point out that the two dominant uh, explanatory frameworks for history were the Marxist, first of all, and the other one was the so-called old historicists. Now, instead of subscribing to such a view of history, the new historicists um, go to school to the writings of Michel Foucault, the French philosopher and thinker. There's absolutely no doubt at all that, as far as conceptualizing history is concerned, the new historicists they take. I won't use the word model, but they take some of the important insights of Michel Foucault. Foucault, who talked about episteme and not about the chronological periodization of history, was looking at precisely this kind of a field that one confronts in reading and trying to interpret history. You may not find the very self assuring continuities. You may not find all those old broad narratives of either progress or development, etc. What you see instead is that there is, let me see, there are these discourses, there is a coexistence of those discourses within an episteme, so that you are enabled to ask certain questions in a certain way. I think this is what the new historicism also tries to do. If you're a Renaissance studies scholar, probably as a new historicist, you would want to do this. You are not looking only at so-called canonical texts, the so-called significant texts in the English tradition. What you are trying to do is to confront history not just through the so-called archival material, official records, inscriptions, and then such things which are generally considered authentic material of the archive for history. The new historicists broke very new ground by bringing in so much of material which normally wouldn't be recognized as material for either reading or interpreting history. You do find wonderful examples, exciting examples in the practice of the new historicists, especially from this point of view, where they open up a huge and um, various diverse kind of field of material for understanding history of a particular period. One of the most brilliant essays written by Stephen Greenblatt, Invisible Bullets, begins with the interrogation and I think the inquiry that took place after Christopher Marlowe, the young playwright, was murdered. And during the inquiry, a particular statement attributed to Christopher Marlowe was discovered. It was a very cryptic kind of a statement where he refers to Moses of the Old Testament as only a juggler or a player of tricks. And then he says this is something which would be known to the explorers, especially Harriet, who had stayed back in America, learned the language of one particular tribe, and wrote a very long, detailed record. Now look at the way the very unexpected kind of material is being networked here. A statement attributed to Marlowe, then a whole history of trials of blasphemy, atheism, which happened during the entire period. Then the record of the history of the English explorers in America, etc. All these are brought in together, not in an exotic manner, but in a very intellectually rigorous way. These texts are read and reread. As I said earlier, what happens in the new historicism is an expansion of the very concept of the text. Here, the term text would refer to all cultural texts. You There is no hierarchization of important or unimportant. What's important for the new historicist is all of them are participating in the creation of the discourses, and more importantly, in so many of the phenomena which are very important. For example, students of literature speak about the use of the mask, which was a very special form of the Renaissance period, in which you would have a bit of dance and a drama, and sometimes a lot of moralizing, and it was meant for a private performance, very different from what was happening in the Globe Theatre of Shakespeare and the others. Now, the new historicist explanation, which is very brilliant, is that this mask, which was in a way spectacular, um, was needed by the power of that time, because the power of that time was confronting rebellion, anarchy, and disorder, and therefore there was the need for imposing a symbolic sense of order, and that is what the form called the mask performed during the Renaissance period. I have given this example just to point out how, first of all, the idea of the historical text or the cultural text is enormously expanded here. That's one. Secondly, again, going back to Michel Foucault, his major focus was on power, on how societies exercise power, and how do they develop, to use a favorite phrase of Stephen Greenblatt also, these technologies of control, technologies of keeping your subjects under control. This is the function performed by these discourses, including the literary texts. Of course, Stephen Greenblatt also raises fundamental questions: insurrection, any kind of question, going to towards history is to understand how power permeated, and how power both constrained and enabled human beings. Um, like Foucault, the practitioners of the new historicism do not believe in talking only about very powerful structures like monarchy, and then saying that these were able to subjugate everything. No, what we are seeing is the permeating nature of power, which does two things. One is it enables you. Ultimately, the power structure has this intention and purpose of keeping things under control. Culture, history are seen in the new historicism as the process of drawing up boundaries and saying that no, you can't trespass this. And how does that happen? It does not happen through coercion. It happens through constructing the self, which Greenblatt would describe as fashioning of the self, and it also happens through the exercise of persuasion, complicity, and sometimes, of course, there is a bit of a coercion also. So, this is the role which the literary texts play, not by themselves alone, but along with the other discourses existing in a particular society. This should be understood very clearly. So, uh, we find the new historicists trying to see how different discourses in different arenas all work together in creating this kind of power which creates subjectivity, even the personal self of people who live during that particular period. Yes, there is, of course, some scope for rebellion also. Greenblatt says that, see, even when you have, for example, in the confrontation between the native red Indians and the English explorers and later settlers, what you see is that, oh, yes, religion is being used, belief systems of the natives are being used to justify the presence of the new civilization here in the American continent. But at the same time, if we read through these texts carefully, Stephen Greenblatt says other voices can also be heard. He's not talking about the success of these voices, but they are also there. So when we read from a new historicist point of view, we are not reading only about domination. We are also looking at the cracks in this domination, and then the strategies which are used. The other phrase used is strategies of containment. For example, as Greenblatt says, one of the functions of the Fairy Queen, written by Edmund Spenser, was to fashion a gentleman for that time and for that society. And such functions are performed by most of the literary texts that we know. And this is done not because the literary text has something so inherently superior. No, no. There's an open ended and a very porous kind of intertextuality. This is one of the major arguments of the new historicism, that because these discourses and texts exist in a field, there is a continuous intertextuality. What went into the travel accounts and the travelogues of Shakespeare's time also went into the making of the play The Tempest. Um, the the incipient ideas of controlling other continents and maybe other cultures also enters into the play The Tempest by Shakespeare. This is what the new historicism means by this intertextuality. And then the more important thing, which I would like to emphasize before concluding, is that we have to understand that the production of a literary text has this function also. It may release a certain social energy during a particular period. Uh, it may be supportive of the creation of certain codes of ethics and behavior, which may ultimately support the existing structure of power. A literary text may participate in such a process also. Um, One question that has been raised about the new historicism is, all right, this is a very exciting way of looking at history and then trying to understand that there is a various and a vast field in which these literary texts are participating. And you are not reducing them to only documents, instances, and examples. You also learn from the formalists and pay attention to the text, but you are not, in a way, sublimating it to something which can't be defended historically. The question that has been raised is, can we agree with this formulation of power in history? Because the new historicism is not just so many exercises in reading of all kinds of texts. There is a coherence, and and generally the coherence is towards understanding the nature of power and the participation of all cultural texts in this particular sphere of power. Does the new historicism take somewhat of a pessimistic view and ultimately say, look, there is power, there is exercise of power, but we are not very sure if there is also space for questioning and rebellion? Greenblatt was very fond of quoting from Franz Kafka, a statement which Kafka is said to have made to his friend. Yes, yes, there is rebellion, and there is this kind of questioning, never ending, but maybe it is not for us. Greenblatt, in many later works, has explained this, and he tries to do it in one of his very recent books, The Tyrant, in which he says that Shakespeare's preoccupation was, um, how does an entire society submit itself to the rule of a tyrant? In play after play, he tries to understand that, and which only makes it very clear that the procedures adopted by the new historicism do not lead you to some kind of a cul-de-sac, I mean, end of the road. Many things are left open. Um, it's not a question of either defending only domination or creating a very romantic view of a successful rebellion. We need to look at an entire field of history as probably contradictory, as involving all these disparities, and maybe not succeeding between uh, entire uh, these negotiations are always very dynamic. They are never one way, and they are not things which can be fixed and labeled very easily. We have to understand that as a new historicist, when you enter into the study of a field called culture or a particular period, you need to open up yourself, your perceptions to the constantly says that the new historicism is not a theoretical model, it's not an ism, it is only a set of practices, it is only a set of interpretative practices, none of which claim to be superior or taking you to the final objective truth of history. The new historicism was also something that came up in the confrontation with post-structuralism and the deconstruction of Derrida. And it does not agree with um, the so-called grand narratives of history. It does not argue or believe that there is something like an objective final truth of history which you would be reaching at the end of your intellectual exploration. What is taken for granted is that uh, we have to reconstruct and understand history with the mediation of the texts. And this is the meaning of the, the motto, one could say, of the new historicism, which is historicizing the text and textualizing history, reading, understanding history as so many texts which need to be interrelated and read, interpreted, and then the idea of historicizing the text, not by keeping it unrelated and isolated in the aesthetic sphere. This is the field set of practices known as the New Historicism. It has made its impact on the very way we write our literary histories now. Thank you.